Hi there. 2 bits of programming matter at the front of this episode. First, I was coughing all during this episode. I recorded it while I had bronchitis. I believe I have edited all of those out. However, please forgive me if I missed any. Additionally, because of that illness, my planning for the next season has been just a little bit derailed. Please be patient as we get the schedule back on track. Thank you for your patience as I have worked out the scheduling for this one, too. Getting it out there for you. However, this is a fun episode about a fun book, so I look forward to you hearing it. Okay, bye. Welcome to Radio Free Midworld. It is a podcast about the Dark Tower series of books and the related works by Stephen King. I'm your host, Cole Ross, and today I am joined by Jim Stormdancer. Hey, Jim.
Hi.
Hey, welcome. This is your first time on the show.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Probably the last one because you've already passed the point at which I stopped reading the Dark Tower books.
What point was that?
I don't remember if I finished Wizard and Glass.
Okay. Yeah, that's a wall for people.
Yeah. And I there was a big temporal gap there. I don't remember if it was like a gap in the time spent writing it, or I just took a break. But I read the first 3 books when I was a teenager, and then the Wizard and Glass like probably 8 years later, and it was either I changed or the series did.
Probably both.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. Today we are here to talk about From a Buick 8. Before I ask you the question about why did you hop onto this episode, I just want to let people know where they might know you from the Video Games Hot Dog podcast, and also you're the creator of the Frogfraction series.
Yep. It's a weird troll video games.
Funny weird troll video games.
I mean, hopefully.
Yeah.
Sometimes the joke is on the player.
I like those jokes.
Oh, good.
Yeah. So you hopped on for From a Buick 8. How come?
This was I read a bunch of Stephen King when I was younger. And this was one of my, I don't know if it was one of my favorite of his works, but one of the most memorable because I read it like right after reading a bunch of Lovecraft, and it struck me like as very much trying to do that sort of thing, but in a modern setting, which I had never really personally conceived of as possible.
Right.
Like,
because
because it's just so, the aesthetic is so tied to, and the weird thing is like, it's not like Lovecraft was writing historical fiction. He was writing contemporary fiction from a certain perspective. The aesthetic is just so closely tied to that era,
to the 20s, like a more information poor era, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, so I'm happy that you noticed this. I went in basically knowing nothing about this book, and this is Lovecrafty as all hell.
Yeah, and it's got to be on purpose. Like King himself was a Lovecraft fan, as far as I know.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
I don't know why I say was, like he died in that truck accident.
The different universes and such things branch. Yeah.
Right. That's a theme of this podcast.
Yeah. Well, he's pretty old. It's one of those things.
Very true.
Yeah, no, I had no idea what to expect with this. This is pretty high up there for King books that I've been introduced to through the show.
Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah,
it's interesting that like it's basically just structurally it's basically just a series of weird shit a fake car does. But somehow like just wrapped in the context of really richly drawn characters and how it affects their lives.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also like the most dangerous stuff is their job as well. Like this bizarre thing, it doesn't actually have that high of a body count. I think it is directly responsible for the deaths of 2 people.
Right. That sounds right from my memory. Yeah.
Like they speculate about some others, just about
And one of the people we don't like very much.
Yeah, so no great loss. I think is
No, no harm, no foul. Yeah.
Yeah. So this.
But then there's the dog. Which
Shit.
many people like more than a human. So
yeah. No, this is if you look this up on Does the Dog Die, the dog emphatically dies in a very bad way.
Trigger warning, dog death.
Yeah, it's a real bummer. And Mr. D's a good dog too.
Yeah,
it's like he gets to just be a dog. He's not a dog that they made into a cop.
Right. Right.
Yeah. So this was published in 2002, and it takes place at this state trooper barracks in rural Pennsylvania, pretty far outside of Stephen King's realm of experience. He had to get a lot of kind of outside input, like factual research input, to make this thing ring true. I liked this quite a bit because my dad is a state trooper. So a lot of this stuff like matched with things that I heard growing up.
That's cool. Yeah. That's cool that it was close enough to the actual job that it passed at least that sniff check.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it just like the things are different. Like every different state has different, like a different culture or different things. But like, yeah, it matched up with stories, especially like the weird, offhanded, goofy stuff. Thing just like, oh yeah, we found this, we pulled this drunk guy over, and blah blah blah.
Yeah.
But yeah, you would be forgiven for making the assumption, like I did, that this was just going to be a redo of Christine. Like, oh, Stephen King writing about a demon car.
Right.
No, it's almost like he set out specifically to make a horror story about a car that doesn't move, because this is an oral history from these troopers talking about this strange car that they found. This Buick
I never read Christine. Does Christine run people over?
Yeah, Christine is like a possessed demon car that like a person, like an old guy, like an old greaser was using. He made a pact by killing his wife. He was using it to maybe like as a backup for his personality, like for himself as a way to like hop bodies. So Christine was the name of the car. It was named after the wife. That guy died. Somebody like a kid, like a high schooler, bought the car off of him, and the kid starts acting like this, old criminal who owned the car. And then Christine also was like trying to kill everybody who was stopping the download from happening. It's really weird.
That's super complicated.
Yeah. It is. It's a little bit crazier than Demon Car. Technically, Christine does take place in the Dark Tower, because the car that appears to take Henry Bowers from the asylum back to Derry in It is Christine. It is the Plymouth Fury.
Oh.
Yeah.
Weird.
Yeah. And then also the toy car that one of the kids is playing with in the Dark Tower movie is a Plymouth Fury.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. I was at my parents' house earlier tonight, and they were watching It. Like my stepdad just put It on because my niece hadn't seen it yet. And I was like calling stuff out and saying like, oh, that's Georgie, that's so-and-so name and all this stuff. And I'm like, Cole, what the fuck are you doing? Like, this is more information than we want.
This is like it's not quite like that. It's more like you're doing a live director's commentary on the movie, as opposed to the commentary track for the Monty Python and the Holy Grail, where it's just a bunch of geeks reciting the lines along with the actors.
Yeah. Ooh, no. Is that a thing, really?
I mean, I'm positing that this is an alternate audio track, because that's just like, I think so many people's first impression of that movie is a huge crowd of people watching it and knowing it really well. And like it's impossible to spoil the jokes for each other. So it's just becoming like a shared ritual.
Yeah. Like Rocky Horror Picture Show or The Room or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. But like, unlike in the case of Rocky Horror, I haven't seen that one, but my understanding is that like a huge part of the value of that movie is watching it with a big crowd of people who like it.
Right. Because they all jeer at it at the same times, and there are like specific rituals that they do.
Right. Whereas Monty Python's movies are really funny if you're not watching them like that,
Right.
and just aggravating if you are.
Yeah, I'm positive that if that did not exist, you just spoke it into existence. So,
Oof. Oh, I'm sorry, guys.
Yeah, we alluded to the fact that this is pretty Lovecraftian, specifically because it is about the frustration of looking for answers that are not there, and trying to impose reason on things that are just really scattered apart. There's several mantras in this, but the main character of the flashbacks, Curtis, he's got a little like nervous take where he says, "Curiosity killed the cat, but satisfaction brought him back." And that is kind of a bit of a summary of his drive.
Yeah.
Yep. Did your copy have the postscript where King talks about what the inspiration for this was?
Yeah, it did.
Yeah,
it did. I have a paperback of some sort, but yeah, apparently he was inspired to write this book by nearly falling into a stream behind a gas station.
Yeah. He was like, what would have happened with all that stuff? Because he was like moving up from Florida. Like he had a big truck full of things. Like, how long would that stuff stick around? And then according...
Oh, yeah. And specifically, I forgot the part about nearly falling and dying.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, just like if he was just gone forever, like the mysterious man is at the beginning of the story.
Right.
I also, before I read this, thought that it had something to do with him being hit by that van.
Oh, right.
Because this is one of the first books that was completed after he was hit by that car in 1999. No, that was just a coincidence. Like nothing about the book changed as a result of his kind of being hit. However, in that postscript, he says, "Yeah, I got a lot of details right about what it's like to be hit by a car." When he talks about Curtis dying. I'm very thankful that this hasn't been made into a movie yet. I don't know who I would trust with it. In 2005, they thought George Romero was going to do it. I think that would be terrible.
What has George Romero done other than zombie movies?
Zombie movies and other schlocky kind of stuff. And his zombie movies have gotten worse over the years.
Right.
But like to 2005, that isn't like prime cut George Romero.
Yeah, I don't want to type to because it would be picked up on the mic, but I was reading about apparently there's a new couple of writers who are trying to take a stab at it as a result of like it being a really popular movie with a lot of income.
Mm-hmm.
There's a resurgence in like people trying to adapt Stephen King works, and that's one of the ones. And I recognized the names of the writers, but I don't remember what they are now.
Yeah.
So
I can pick that up if you have more to say about what you think a movie adaptation of this would be good at and good for.
It's hard to imagine. You could just shoot it like all the best scenes from the book, put those in a row, and that would be not a bad movie probably.
Yeah.
But making all the stuff that was just kind of hinted at in the book, so much needs to be literalized to be able to put in front of your eyes.
Right.
That it would be you'd need some really creative, really out there artists to do the material justice, and it would be tricky.
Yeah, so much of kind of the symbolism of this is brought forward in kind of internal monologuing that happens.
Yeah, there's that.
Yeah, and the conversations would be very strange. It's weird, right? Because he started writing this in 1999. There's a certain found footage aspect to the story.
It's told in like the framing device is that a bunch of people are telling the story of this car to the new kid.
Yeah.
And so like they could do the internal monologue stuff with like narration style, like it's a similar style framing device of like just put the words in people's mouths.
Oh yeah, do it like a voiceover.
I think that would work.
Yeah. I don't know. It's just found footage stuff is coming back too. I think that they could assemble that as well.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. The script that was written back then was by Jonathan Sheech and Richard Chismar.
Oh, yeah, that was Jonathan. I don't know how to pronounce his name. I don't think it's Sheech, but He was Jimmy in That Thing You Do.
Oh, yeah. I don't care for that movie too much. I saw it. So it's one of those movies that my stepdad just watches over and over again. It's that and A Few Good Men.
Right.
So yeah, that one wore itself out. But yeah, he definitely was in that. He was in a bunch of stuff. Yeah. And also like the new directors that it went through were Toby Hooper and William Brent Bell, but I don't know.
Yeah, so that's probably the name that I recognized when I was talking about knowing shit.
Yeah. Who knows? It's neat to see that bumper crop of Stephen King adaptations getting picked up because there's still plenty of good movies to make. I'm curious about Dr. Sleep. I liked that book quite a bit. That's gonna have a lot of baggage by being a sequel to The Shining, but
right.
Yeah.
I mean, it could be good. You could just do Shining adaptations for 1,000 years, and probably some of them would be good.
Yep. 1,000 monkeys writing 1,000 Shining adaptations each. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So there are some Dark Tower connections in this. The Buick is pretty similar to the cars that the low men drive, the Cantoy, those off people who have chased Callahan around. We're going to see more of them in book 6 and also around book 7 when we talk about Hearts in Atlantis. They drive these cars that are not quite right. Additionally, there's speculation both on StephenKing.com and on various wikis and discussions that the strange man who leaves the Buick behind at the gas station, some people say that is Randall Flagg. Other people say that it is a low man. Are you listening along with the show past where you read, Jim?
No, I will cherry pick, like, if you cover another book I've read, I'll listen to those ones, but not I haven't listened to ones about stuff I haven't read yet.
Yeah. So I don't think you hadn't encountered the Cantoy. That is definitely a book 5, 6, 7 thing that they bring in. Yeah. Just weird otherworldly people that wear human skin mask kind of things.
Okay. Yeah.
The monsters that come through the Buick, because the Buick itself is not directly a monster, it summons them in. They're really similar to the ones that appear in The Mist, with the exceptions of the big tentacle guys and things like that, and thus are pretty similar to the monsters that exist in Toadash space beyond the thinnies and kind of in the layers between the towers. Yeah. And then there are recurring names. One of the main narrators has a last name of Dearborn, like Will Dearborn, Roland's alias in Wizard and Glass. And Curtis studies dissection in a book written by someone with a last name, Maturin.
So these connections, it's hard to get a read on whether those are, like, my sense of it is that we're not in the forefront of the author's mind when he wrote this book about, like, yeah, I'm gonna tie all these stories into this other story I'm weaving,
right?
And that arguably these are it is this other work, this expansive work that has its tendrils out psychologically into everything around it, that is it kind of like is a magnet for making connections. Which I think is a really neat phenomenon, and, like, aspirationally, like, that's a really cool thing for a creator to do.
Right. It's like every individual thing that he has done, even when he isn't set out to directly connect it, it's like he's adding a bunch of stuff that he can work in later if he so chooses, right? Because, like, he started this in 1999 around the time that Hearts in Atlantis, that collection was put out. The Low Men and the Yellow Coats, I don't even know if that was supposed to be, like, I don't even know if that was written as a Dark Tower connected thing. I don't know what the intention was, but it absolutely is. Because, like, Anthony Hopkins' character, shows up in book 7, spoilers, but yeah, like, he's just deciding, like, laying all this stuff out and deciding if it fits in the palette or not.
Yeah. And the reason I'm thinking of this probably is that this is the sort of thing I was trying to do with the Frog Fractions 2 Kickstarter.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that, like, this is creating an atmosphere where every game might have another game hidden in it.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the saddest things I've done in my life was ruining that by actually releasing Frog Fractions 2.
It's a toxic assumption that there needs to be like a work product, like an actual like buyable thing at the end of something like that.
Oh, unfortunately, that's what I promised.
Yeah, but like that just man, like that was such a wonderful fiction you guys did.
Yeah, I'm very proud of that.
Yeah. Like for all the times that kind of became like a weird, goofy, played out joke, like, oh, it's Rock Fractions 2, lol. Like, I don't know. I was curious. I was like into the hunt. Like, around the time Rock Fractions 2 released, like there was a great write up done on Polygon. I think like Justin McElroy did that, like,
yeah,
like as like almost like another oral history of like the Kickstarter up through release that I thought was really good. If people are curious about what we're talking about when we talk about your Kickstarter.
Yeah, the story of that Kickstarter and the story of the ARG and the story of the game's development are pretty well documented in the game's press.
Mm-hmm.
I have a talk about that process that I gave at I can't remember the name of the event. Shit. It was a maze,
okay,
which is still like one of my favorite gaming events that I can't afford to go to because they paid for me to go there 1 year and give a talk.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, if you live in Europe, I highly recommend this event in Berlin. And also, there's this YouTube video of me giving a talk about the ARG.
Yeah, I will seek out those links as well.
I can send you some for the show notes if you have such a thing in your podcast.
I do, and that would make my work very much easier.
Cool.
Yeah, but yeah, it's I have no idea. Like so, what this adds, just the idea that okay, we have interdimensional stuff, which is something that happens a great deal in the Dark Tower books. Does anything that involves hopping through dimensions automatically make it part of the Dark Tower? I don't know.
I think the nature of the Dark Tower series makes it so.
Yes.
Like what it does to you, like the reader psychologically, it makes you form those connections. And that's one of the powers of that work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But it's very clear when King is sitting down and like writing a tower related thing. Like, have you read Insomnia?
Yes. Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah. Where it's a really, like the first half of it is a really cool and neat horror story about a guy who starts seeing things. And like the very back there, it is like, haha, psych, it was a Dark Tower book.
Yeah, I didn't really think about it at the time, but that's actually super weird.
It's like super important. Like King says it's not in the last book, but it totally is.
Right. That is a thing about like he is so convincing as a writer that like you'll get sucked along on any weird shit, and it'll be like, yeah, of course that happened.
Yep.
I read this book. I'm not a reader anymore, which is sad, but like I used to read like 2 or 3 books a week.
Nice.
And then I stopped taking a bus to work. And then didn't realize for years why don't I read anymore? Well, it's because I'm not taking a bus to work. And I read this book. My experience trying to get back into reading was like, oh, this is drudgery and this is not fun. And why am I doing this to myself?
Yeah.
Oh, because I want to be a reader. But I ripped through this book. Like I was staying up late to read it. And like, this is why I read. This is fucking like, because it's good and fun and entertaining and like in some cases informative.
Yeah.
And that's like, that gives me hope for the future of my status as a reader. Like all I actually need to do is find the good books.
Yeah. You have to find the stuff that makes you want to do it. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. This is also pretty slight as far as Stephen King goes.
It's like 400 pages, something like that.
And it moves really quick because it's real episodic as well.
Yep.
Yeah. And it's told from a bunch of different perspectives as well. So like you're never like sitting in the head of somebody you don't like for too long.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's really good. Let's talk about what's going on here. So we're introduced to this. Our primary narrator in the present is Sergeant Sandy Dearborn. And he is talking about Ned Wilcox, this high high school kid, kind of all-American, good guy who is hanging out around the barracks after his dad, Curtis, was killed by a drunk driver, the evilly named Bradley Roach. You just know that guy's going to be no good.
Anybody with the last name Roach, the author doesn't like them.
I wonder if that's a hidden perk of being an author, especially like a prevalent one. If somebody named Brad wrongs you at some point, well, here you go.
Oh yeah, like Santorum.
Yeah. Or do that. Oh gosh, that was the thing Michael Crichton did. I just realized that, where he put that character in Jurassic Park or something that shared the name of somebody who gave him a bad review and made it so the character had a small penis.
Oh, just the throwaway line about, and his penis is really small.
And the guy couldn't sue because in order for it to be liable, it has to be untrue. And so he would
and you'd have to prove it.
You would have to prove your penis size. That's what I learned in school anyway. I have no idea. Like if you walked it, like if they put up a curtain and you walked and opened up your pants in front of a judge, like who's to say what's big or small? I don't know. That might be apocryphal. But it is an incredibly petty thing.
There's legal cases that establish that there's case law that establishes that if you have a small dick, you have to wait. It's established here.
I don't know.
Okay, all right. We can. It's cool. This is not a law podcast, so we can say whatever the fuck we want.
Yes, we can. And if people decide to believe us, well, that's their problem. Yeah. But yeah, and Ned's doing some chores around here. I end up liking Ned. However, the only disagreeable qualities that Ned has are impatience, because he wants to know about his dad, and also he's very much like his dad. And I think he's reacting like a reasonable person would, to the information that he's getting.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know. But he's just hanging around, wants to be around the place where his dad worked. He's doing odd jobs until he notices this shed with a strange blue Buick that has been there since 1979. And eventually they notice, oh, we've got a light quake happening here. It just starts flashing off these big purple lights, and the temperature drops around it, and there's a big hum, and the radios go out. So yeah, they decide, let's sit down. Let's take you in now that you're working dispatch, and you're a real sad kid because you got into college and you wanted your dad to see that. So we're going to tell you the story.
Yeah, there's this weird element of them kind of just deciding that, like, they're trying to keep this weird not car a secret because it's dangerous. But they can't keep it that much of a secret because it's just kind of in the shed behind the police station.
Right.
So they've got these. They just have this. They decided that, like, well, every cop is just going to know about it, and they justify that, like, well, police can, like, there's a culture that just happens to be able to keep a secret.
Yeah.
And so I guess it's because, like, they probably do it because he saw the light quake. But they just decide, okay, I guess he's close enough to a cop now, even though he's going off to college next year or whatever.
He's got a pay stub.
Right.
Yeah. There's a little bit of buy-in that you have to take, right? Because if this thing is letting out blinding flashes at random odd times. Like,
the idea of keeping that a secret, like, and the story talks about, like, a couple of close calls where someone almost finds out about it.
Yeah, they have like senators and governors coming by to do like honorary visits and things.
And there might even be, like, luck doesn't necessarily have to be a factor, because the story also talks about how the car has, like, a certain degree of control about its surroundings, so maybe it wanted to remain a secret.
Yeah, maybe the car knew that if it was found out by anybody who was not, controllable as part of this culture, then it would be, disassembled, etc.
Right. Or put into some situation that was not optimal for whatever its intention was.
Yeah, for whatever its purpose was. Yeah. But yeah, they're also telling him about it because, like, I think they feel that it's owed him a little bit, specifically because the car was his dad's project. It was Curtis's project.
Right.
Yeah. So it's a couple of people, primarily Sandy Dearborn, the current sergeant, and then there's kind of a rotating cast of people who give their own little piece. But yeah, like the majority of this book, with the exception of like the final two chapters or the final two major areas, it all takes place, back in the past. So 1979 up through 1988 are the primary times. What do you think about Ned's reaction to Sandy's storytelling method? Because Sandy is really insistent on adding context, and saying like, yeah, this is how the Buick became a background detail. Like, was that friction for you, or did that seem to add?
I think part of the theme of the book, and we've touched on this a little bit, is that this is not everything is knowable.
Right.
And I think Ned, in part, is there to provide the perspective of somebody who wants to just just tell me what happened. Yeah. Tell me this, and tell me something that gives me closure, or that I would recognize as here's why this is happening.
Yeah.
Or even just here is a story. And it's actually as a result, it's pretty hard for the author to finish the book in a way that feels like a story. Mm-hmm. He does, I think, manage it, but it at least feeling like there's an arc that happens. But it is very much like the kind of the theme of the book that, no, this is not a thing that if you can study it all you want, but it's like studying white noise.
Yeah.
Where there's a pattern here, but even if you find it, you're not going to know what to make of it.
Yeah. And so much of this is disconnected that any melody that you find in the white noise is probably of your own creation.
Right.
Yeah.
Although I actually I feel like the imagery presented in the book is, and maybe this is because it's filtered through human perspectives in this, even diegetically, it's filtered through human perspectives. Mm-hmm. I feel like the imagery presented is a little bit too mundane to sell that.
Yeah.
Like the fact that they describe the thing that comes out of the car as a bat.
Right.
Immediately the reader visualizes a bat as I know about bats.
Yeah. I've seen bats in books.
In my headcanon, this thing was constantly emitting okay, here's a life form that is from a universe that the laws of physics are such that it just immediately dissolves into nothing, right? Because the laws of physics are different. Or the light quakes are themselves a life form that comes out of the trunk. Mm. Or here's a civilization that passes through the trunk and you just don't see it because it's microscopic. That sort of thing is approaching the kind of alienness that I wanted to see from this thing.
Yeah. So I conceptualized the light quakes as almost a like a weather event that was happening on the other side that just happened to seep through.
Right.
Yeah. Just like a particular kind of storm that was going on. Yeah. So I initially thought that I was annoyed at Ned's kind of treatment of this because, yeah, he's listening to this story as though it has an ending. And when I got to the end, I kind of realized oh, that actually makes a lot of sense. He's listening for an ending, and kind of the story is oh, the story isn't over. They're telling him everything that happened up to now, and this thing is still here and it's still doing its thing. We're living through it. It's not done yet. I realized I was actually annoyed with Sandy because Sandy was getting angry at Ned for asking reasonable questions. He was getting angry at Ned for using the word that they used to describe the bat. Tell him about the fish. And then whenever Ned called it a fish, I think Sandy just had residual resentment for Curtis that he was taking out on Ned.
Right.
Something like that. Because Sandy and Curtis are set up against each other a little bit. They've got different philosophies. Curtis believes there's an answer, and Sandy says, yeah, well, we have to be ready for there to be none.
Yeah. Well, I think Ned is supposed to be the audience cipher in this case. He's asking the questions that the audience wants the answers to. Mm-hmm. And when they're trying to convince Ned that there's nothing to learn here, they're also kind of trying to teach that lesson to the reader.
Yeah, I can see that. So I already talked about how there was only a couple of people, who were directly taken by the Buick. Something that is kind of a background level of detail, because Sandy is adding all of this context. We get a lot of glimpses of the untimely ends that troopers just suffer in the line of duty, or by their poor coping skills. We learn a lot about, like, this person who was in the story, he's not here anymore because he committed suicide. Just because the job takes a toll.
And any, like, almost any story that takes place over like 30 years like that, and you see people dropping out of the picture, it is just a grim reminder that we are all aging meat sacks.
Yeah.
It not something that I'm like super thrilled to be thinking of, to be reminded of all the time.
Right. Yeah.
Well, hell, even having like a child has done that. Like, when I think about, like, well, I've got to prepare for when this kid like goes to high school. Oh, I'm gonna be in my mid-50s.
Oh,
cool.
That'll be weird. Doing the calculus of, like, okay, how old am I going to be at his high school graduation, then his college graduation, if he chooses to go. Yeah.
Whereas before having a child, the furthest I'd ever planned out my life in advance was the Frog Fractions 2 Kickstarter, when I said it would take a year and a half.
Right. Yeah. And you have a little bit of that kind of turn going on with Sandy as well, because he's not the sergeant in this story. Like, we've got somebody who, I need to see how it's spelled. The name isn't spelled like it's pronounced. It's pronounced Shandinks, but it's spelled Shindukes or something like that.
I don't remember this.
Yeah, to Tony.
Probably if you remembered how it was. If you could spell it for me, I bet I would know who you're talking about.
It's Tony. Let me.
Oh yeah, Tony. Yeah. Tony something.
Oh, Tony Shundist is the way that it looks like it's pronounced, but
that's what I remembered. Yeah. And he ends up another grim, and this isn't even the end of his life.
No,
but another grim outcome is him having dementia.
Yeah, he retired because he was getting slow on the uptake, and like the troopers in the current day talk about going to visit him.
Yeah,
and like going to visit him and hearing him say, "Oh, I'm in hell. This is hell."
Yeah, good. Yeah. That sounds like how I envision Alzheimer's or dementia being.
Yeah. No, I lost my grandpa to dementia earlier this year. It fucking sucks.
I'm really sorry.
No, thank you. I've talked about it a little bit. It is terrible. And even before I saw that, it was one of my greatest fears. And anytime it pops up in media, I think even going back to like Flowers for Algernon or something like that, reading that in middle school.
One thing about aging that is like the silver lining that I see in it is that the closer you get like to death, I'm betting that the more you start to welcome it, because your life just starts getting worse.
Yeah.
Like you're, I don't know if you're like me, but when I was younger, I just never wanted to go to sleep. I would be like, fuck, sleep is basically death.
Right.
And I would stay up as late as possible every night. But at some point you're like, even if you feel like that, you're like, sleep sounds all right. I'm tired enough that sleep sounds okay. And I feel like I'm going to be like that with getting old and dying too.
Yeah. Well, it's not all days are good days, right? It's just more of them is not necessarily the more of the best days you've ever had. Yeah. I've always loved sleep. Is my problem. I like hitting fast forward.
Skip this bullshit. You could sleep for the next 2 years.
Yeah, just skip a day. Come on. So let's talk about them finding this Buick, because coincidence of coincidences, the same person who killed Curtis, the drunk driver, Bradley Roach, he was the person who found the car. He was working at a filling station. A strange cloaked man appeared with the Buick, and then walked back toward the bathroom and out of our dimension entirely. The only details being he was wearing a black trench coat. He had a vaguely Russian accent. They say it's like Boris Badenov from, Rocky and Bullwinkle. He has a weird ear, and all that he said was, "Oil's fine." Gone. I like this because it is kind of told a little bit from Bradley Roach's perspective. Like, there are probably details that he just didn't notice because he was reading the Inside View, the weekly world news kind of thing going on.
Right.
Yeah. But they call Troop D and Curtis Wilcox and Ennis Rafferty report to inspect this. We're introduced to the concept of earthquake country. The idea that before an earthquake, the air will get colder around an area. And Curtis is immediately kind of infatuated with the car, noticing that it is completely spotless in spite of the rainy, muddy day. I want to camp out a little bit on the details about this car because I love all of the description that goes into exactly how wrong it is.
I feel like this would be more meaningful to me if I knew what the actual Buick 8 was like.
Yeah, so like the one that's on the cover is done up to be demonic.
Right.
It's a neat car. It is one of those like old big boat kind of cars.
Right.
If you do a search, like don't look at a modern one like the ones from the 80s because those look like ugly 80s old man cars. Weirdly enough, I'm talking a lot about my family today. There's a picture of my grandma, like when she was a teenager, like way back in the day, probably around like the early 50s, late 40s, something like that, leaning against one of these. Like they had a friend who had like this cherry,
like a cheesecake shot,
kinda, yeah. Like it was, she I think she maybe took
Those are always fun.
Yeah, it's like, oh yeah, like you were.
Yeah, I remember discovering that my grandmother was once beautiful.
Yeah. It's like you can look at her and see it, like, oh yeah, I can trace the line between this and that. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think maybe she took it to send it to my grandpa when he was in Korea. I have no idea, but it's a picture that popped up, and I was like, yeah, that's a Buick. It's got those portholes on the side and stuff. Even without knowing what this thing looks like, just the description of the dashboard is really cool to me. The fact that like all of the controls are just kind of held in place; they're not connected to anything.
Well, one of the fun things about this part of the book, like so far, is that like this could be someone's like, yeah, I just made a prank fake car to drop. To leave at a gas station as an art project.
Yeah. They raise that possibility as well, and they even refer to it as like an objet d'art, just because it is basically a sculpture. Like it never could drive.
Right.
Yeah. It's not until they get down to like inspecting the materials where like, oh, this is not like the glass in here is not like, it doesn't bear the trademark or the composition of any glass that the forensics team has ever seen.
Right.
The dashboard, it's maybe oak, but we can't identify it. And it's like, this is a scientific team that is meant to identify cars.
Yeah, no, I invented my own glass processing technique.
Yes.
I made it from sand in order to make my art not car to give to these cops.
Yeah, it's a big paperweight. It's my gift to you, a lifetime a lifetime of worry. Oh, yeah. But it can never run. There's the wires in the engine don't go anywhere. The steering wheel, like the entire thing, it just kind of seems like maybe somebody's idea of a car made vaguely to blend in, and kind of like that almost off verisimilitude to this.
Almost like Ford Prefect naming himself that.
Yeah.
Like because I don't know if you guys haven't read the Hitchhiker's Guide series, that character named himself Ford Prefect because when he was traveling to Earth, he thought that the car was the dominant species on the planet and he wanted to blend in. So yeah, just like seeing this as an artifact of an intelligence wanting to create something that would fit in well enough that people would treat it as part of the scenery, at least for a while. But also maybe like it also might honestly have been part of their intention to make it be interesting enough to be around it and pay attention to it.
Yeah, like this is a curiosity. Like we need to treat it with special care. Like we need to give it a place of prominence where it can sit and do its thing.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, like, if that was the intention, they succeeded. I mean, this thing has been kept in very good custody for many, many years. You know,
Yeah, it's true.
If you consider good custody being everything that comes out of it, they kill with a rake.
If it doesn't just die on its own, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. If it doesn't die. Man, I want to talk about those monsters. They're so good.
We'll get there.
Yeah.
We'll get there.
Yep. But they take it back to the station, and very quickly, Ennis Rafferty disappears. They have no way of knowing exactly what happens. They just know, oh, well, like, he never returned back to his house. His sister never saw him again. He left his workout clothes where they were. He's just gone. They can only conclude, like, oh, the car probably ate him somehow. Like, I think they even say that as a joke.
Yeah, and this is something that this is an idea that is brought up early on and established pretty firmly as a near certainty by the end of the book.
Yeah.
Which I think kind of tracks the arc of the character's understanding of what happened.
Yes. Like, what it took was for one of the people who's still alive to almost have what happened to Ennis happen to them. They went through the process. Like, yeah, we can talk about this now. What the car is doing is reaching out and fascinating people and drawing people into it to climb into its trunk, so it can be passed through to what's on the other side.
Yeah. And why it's doing this, we never learn. And like and this is part of the fun of this sort of story, is hypothesizing why this thing even exists.
Yes.
Like, is there some scientist, probably not even a scientist whose native universe is the two that are being linked,
right,
who just is like kind of smashing these two places together and seeing what happens?
Is this a social thing? Because that there are sentient beings on both sides.
Right. Yeah. Like let's learn what happens when these two races meet.
Yeah. Like, is there an actual malevolence to this, or are we just ascribing malevolence to it because the worlds that are connected are incompatible?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's one of my favorite Lovecraftian ideas, is the rejection of the concept of evil.
Right.
Like the idea that, like, none of the bad things in Lovecraft are necessarily ill-intentioned. They're just like, no, this is a creature or a state of being or just a place that is extremely bad for humans, and that is in fact true of the vast majority of the universe anyway.
Right. Yeah. The closest things that approach, actual, like, capital E evil that you encounter in a Lovecraft story are the evils that one person who is trying to understand or has been broken by exposure does to another person. Like, it is humans misunderstanding and acting on each other too.
Right.
Yeah. Because what is perceived as that greater evil is just a complete indifference to any idea of what you, the ways you would act or what your motivations would be.
Yeah. There's a similar scene or similar, like, idea in the Tommyknockers, where that's a story about, like, a town being, I guess they get there, like, there's a UFO that lands there or something, and the town all is blessed with, like, weird. I think what's happening is that they're mind melding with alien intelligences, and the way this presents itself at first is that they all, like, they remain human, but they start having the knowledge and abilities of these aliens, and so they all start inventing weird shit. Like, one of the kid who wants to be a magician invents a way to actually teleport things, and ends up teleporting his little brother to who knows where. And there's just a flash of, like, oh yeah, no, he's on some alien planet where he died immediately because of the temperature or the atmosphere.
Yeah.
And that feels a lot more like if this were just, even like if it were like literally random, it would be at a point in space where there was no light visible. But that feels like the fact that the places being connected are two places with seemingly intelligent life forms that can perceive each other as life forms and perceive like the planet on the universe on the other side as like, here is a landscape with plants.
Yes.
It seems almost inevitable that some intelligent thing deliberately did this.
Yeah. Otherwise, how would it match up? Because if it was just a portal to a random place, then it would just like open up, I don't know, into magma, or just, well, really, realistically, statistically, just the vacuum of space. It would suck you out, and you would decompress and freeze, all those nasty things.
Yep.
Yeah, I can see that. Man, so many good hypotheses in this. I don't even know if I'm satisfied with the one they reach at the end, but you don't have to be, because it's really just, it's like an educated guess.
Yep.
Yeah. The other thing that's weird about this, and this is important for that ending, is that the Buick heals itself from all damage. They run tests on it. Like, they try to pop the tires, but it just seals and then reinflates. Nothing will stick into the tires. No mud will stick to the outside of it, even when they hang a tarp over it to cover it up. It seems to shrug the tarp off.
What that makes me wonder is, like, could someone, like, steal the tires from this car, install them on their own car, and just never have to buy new tires?
Or would those tires roll back and try and get back on the original car, crushing the new car in the process?
I would imagine that in my head canon, the old car just grows new tires. It's like a lizard regrowing its tail.
So if you cut the Buick 8 in half lengthwise and then move them far enough apart, will it just grow? Will you just have two Buicks at the end of that?
Oh, that's beautiful. I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they're each half as haunted.
Oh, okay. Huh. And then what happens is they just collide with each other. You fuse up, and then they warp all of the remaining mass back to the other dimension.
Or maybe they become, and this is what you're saying, forgive me, like maybe the trunks of the two Buicks become linked to each other. So if you drive one to LA, you can have an instant teleport to visit your friend in LA.
Oh, or would that be a little bit like putting a portable hole into a bag of holding, that it eventually just inverts space around it?
I'm not familiar with this. Is this like established in one of the D&D rule sets?
Maybe it's that also might be an apocryphal meme that I just read about back in the early 2000s when I started playing D&D.
Right.
Yeah, but the idea is that those two things are incompatible, because and it causes like basically a black hole or something results from that.
That's good. Yeah. Just give your players the ability to end the universe.
Yeah, why not? Yeah. So the other thing that happens, they've got these light quakes that start up. The biggest deal is it cuts off the communications, which seems like a problem for a troop. But also they got this dog, Mr. Dillon. I almost called him Master Dillon, which would be weird. Mr. D, who barks and runs at the shed. They're initially worried because they think he's going to be burned up. They think he's going to be irradiated. But no, there's no heat. There's no radiation. It's just a bunch of light that comes through.
Yeah, I think it's trying to portray dogs as having some sort of preternatural understanding that this is a bad thing. I wonder, were there any black people in this story? Because they would have the exact same role in a Stephen King book.
Yeah. So that's tricky. There are not a lot of people, like, I don't think Arky's black because he's specifically Norwegian.
Right.
Like nobody has specifically said like, oh, and his white pink skin, etc. However, if there was a black person in a Stephen King book, even though nobody else's race was remarked upon, that would be remarked upon. So
that's a good point.
I don't know. This is tricky.
Maybe the dog was black.
Oh, there we go. Yeah. Poor Mr. D. But he's right. The dog is, there's something happening. Something is coming through. Maybe he's sniffing out these beings on the other side, because eventually the arrivals start. Arky, the janitor, the custodian, notices that the trunk is open. There are black smears black smears all over the inside of the shed, and laying in the corner is the bat thing. that reeks of cabbage and peppermint as it rotting cabbage rather and peppermint as it rapidly decomposes, like oxidizes when exposed to our atmosphere. Yeah. I love the description of this thing. And we remarked on the fact that bat is kind of not the right way to, say it.
Well, but... and I think the rotting cabbage and peppermint are filling the same sort of role there of being like, it doesn't really smell like peppermint. But
no.
What else? What are you going to say? You say that this is like the closest that your human olfactory organ is capable of perceiving.
Yeah, like your nose, like the buds in your sinuses or whatever are picking this up. They're picking up these particular like hydrocarbons, and that's what it is. And no, you're just going to match it. It's going to be like the end of contact. It is presenting as something you can comprehend.
Right.
There's a little bit of a common biological vocabulary across these things too, like crazy like pink feeler kind of things in place of heads is part of the deal. Also, nobody can really agree on the number of limbs that any of them have.
That I do like the idea that like you might that the thing is perceived. There's like kind of like a snap to grid going on for each person.
Yeah,
but it's different for each person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it never sticks around long enough for anybody to like get an objective truth, right?
Actually count the limbs. Yeah.
Right. With the bat thing, they keep it around long enough to dissect it, but with the other stuff, like it doesn't stick around enough because it just turns into like a white goo that, oh god, poor Arky has to squeegee up off of the crown. This is about the time that Curtis becomes the head of the Buick project. In my head, I cast him as a Kurt Russell circa The Thing. I don't know. Maybe it's because he kept on calling Arky he kept on calling Arky a Swede.
Okay, that is a Kurt Russell kind of a thing to say.
I don't know.
If it were played by Kurt Russell, they would change his name to not be Kurt.
Yes. That also could be why I cast him as Kurt Russell in my head.
Could be.
But yeah, Curtis takes us over. Sandy, we already talked about how different they are. If Curtis's mantra is curiosity killed the cat, but satisfaction brought him back, Sandy does not think satisfaction exists and says why is a crooked letter that can never be set straight. So I like that. I like that dueling philosophy that happens there. This is when the experiments start up because Curtis is acting as an amateur scientist. They sacrifice lots of small animals. I love the exchange between the sergeant and one of the guys. He says, "Okay, go get some gerbils. Take some money from the discretionary fund or whatever." And the guy says, "Hey, do you want me to get food?" And the sergeant says, "No, we're just going to send them in there to starve. Get them food, you dipshit." It's one of those things, right? Because like they are helped so much by procedure, in dealing with this. Like I think that the fact that they are a state trooper kind of outfit, they've got a number of things, just the way things happen to investigate and deal with problems. But there's also the taking orders literally problem that goes on with this.
Right.
Yeah. But they sacrificed lots of tiny animals, and this kind of puts a little bit of truth to what they suspected happened with Rafferty, with Ennis, because like one of the frogs disappears, but the other doesn't. A gerbil is taken from one side of the habit trail that they put in, but not the other. Also without the whole thing being opened up, like it's taken from a closed box.
And that's a sign that it was not an intelligent thing that designed this thing, because those gerbil habit trails are really cool. Like, yeah. Why wouldn't they want one of those?
Take one of those back and like run your own local fauna through that. Like you can only, yeah. I mean, if you don't learn anything, you still let your little indescribable beetle creatures have a fun time.
Yeah, if they have the concept of fun.
That's what they're missing. They're just trying to bring back fun.
No, that makes sense.
Yeah.
They should have sent the car like 30 years later so they can get the Nintendo Switch.
Oh, yeah, that thing would work over there for a while. Do you think that's what the radio was? Were they trying to send their Switch over?
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah.
Huh. And we just couldn't figure out how to play with it.
They just couldn't find the on button.
That's the thing. It really was just like a thing made of rock.
Right.
Something they talk about when the bat first comes through is the idea that there's kind of an exchange going on. Almost like there's kind of a conservation of mass going on. So it took Ennis and then it sent over this big bat thing for them to look at. It's almost like they sent over these gerbils and frogs and whatever. And they're like, okay, what's our equivalent right here? Have a bunch of leaves that'll turn into white goo.
Yeah, there might be some sort of like exchange of matter happening. Like atom for atom.
Man, just thinking about like antimatter matter reaction kind of stuff. They're lucky that it just kind of degraded and didn't explode.
Oh yeah, that's I forget the name of this hypothesis, or the idea that like the reason that our universe the reason that we haven't like blown ourselves up with nuclear weapons is that in the 99% of universes where that did happen, we just weren't around to observe it.
Is that like quantum immortality or something like that?
It's like that. The anthropic principle, I think, is what it's called.
Okay.
It's just the idea that like as unlikely as it is that that the universe is set up to be good for us.
Yeah.
Like of all the places, of all the like the planets that we could live on, that most planets are like constantly bombarded with asteroids and gamma ray bursts and that sort of thing.
Right.
And the reason we live on this one is that this is the planet that just doesn't happen to have that be the case.
Right. That is really unsatisfying to me because that places some kind of primacy on humans. Like it assumes that we matter.
Well, we matter to ourselves.
Oh, that's true. It also feels a little bit like that Candide quote that people think is sincere, but is actually sarcastic. We live in the best of all possible worlds.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Who knows? Yeah. I don't know. Probability is weird. They cut apart one of those bats. They cut apart the bat and they find out that it had babies. But not before a huge explosion of goo covers everybody. Fortunately, Curtis had a mask on, otherwise he would have gotten some into his mouth, and we see what happens with that later. But yeah, this is where it's hilarious because all of the troopers just start throwing up because of the smells and stuff. Like
just because they couldn't tell how many fucking skulls this thing had, they all thought it was a different number.
Yeah, just like, okay, like is this spongy thing in its chest its brain? Where are its lungs? Stuff like that. Yeah,
and they set the scene up by having Curtis spend, I don't know, like a year, like learning how to dissect stuff.
Yeah.
And the outcome is that he cuts it open and doesn't have any sort of context for what he's looking at because he was dissecting things from our own world.
Yeah, where like a vertebrate kind of looks like a vertebrate, you know?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
They're all just kind of like weird morphs of one another.
Yeah, it's just different costumes on the same skeletons.
Yep.
But the hilarious part, you spend all that time getting good at dissecting, like starting with frogs and then working up to different things. He never told his family what was going on, but he still practiced at home.
Oh yeah, so they were just like, oh, this is a weird, gross new hobby.
Yeah, a little grim, Dad. Yeah. 4 years later, by 1983, they start making expeditions with ropes tied onto them. Nobody thinks it would work, that would help them, but you know, it's like Dumbo's feather, right?
Right.
And they set up watches as well. They've got a little jerk off shack back there. That they have to put people back there off the books, so they're not being paid for it. But they've got like a 24-hour watch on it. Oh, well.
Yeah, well, and what the hell are they going to do, you know? Like...
Right. Yeah. It's funny because they set up that thermometer to test and see, like, okay, it's colder inside this shed. Like if it drops down, maybe that predicts when a light quake is going to happen. No, not really. And does a light quake predict when something will come through? No, not really. We just kind of think that they're correlated.
But it does seem like the temperature dropping is related to like things appearing and disappearing.
Yeah. It's just not sure like how much it needs to drop for that to happen. Yeah. So the next arrival is a gigantic fish that doesn't really do much aside from kind of flop out of the trunk because it's too big for it. And also it's split down the side because of this pressure difference.
Right. So presumably what's happening there is like the trunk can be hooked up to different parts of this planet. And like presumably it's all the same planet because of the shared physiology between those creatures, but there can only be a few places. Like they had one per biome or something because we revisit one of those places later in the story.
Yeah, like we see
that
all the stuff from our side drops
underwater.
off.
Right, yeah. One of the places is underwater apparently because there's not just a little bit of water because it's a deep sea fish that explodes at the surface.
Yes. Yeah. So I have no idea. Like I think like the drop off point is like a shore. I think. I forget. So like maybe
I remember. Yeah, I don't really remember the details there, but I think there was water involved.
Okay. Yeah. It's like a big long like slope down to a rocky shore.
That sounds right.
Or at least that's what Sandy saw when he peeked through. Yeah. By the mid-'80s, light shows get less intense, less frequent, all of those. And they get some beetles coming through. You get a gigantic flower that stinks and hurts to look at. There's a thing they think is a red stick, but it's actually a lizard. There's a bunch of gross, weird stuff, but it like settles into a rhythm, and they've got a job to do again, and this thing becomes mundane. I'm curious how the onboarding works around that. When you explain what a code D is.
Oh, like, and especially later on when the new trooper might have been at it for like, he's been working here for a year before he finds out about this, before the car coughs something up because it's getting rarer and rarer. And like it's earlier on, like you knew what you were getting into.
Yes.
Much sooner before you got settled into your job. And now it's more like you get surprised after a year and a half of nothing. Mm-hmm. Of like, oh shit, there's also this other weird aspect you have to deal with.
Yeah. It's sometime around here as well that one of the troopers gets kind of manipulated by the car as well. Like it wants to climb. The trooper wants to climb into the trunk as well, and avoids that.
Right, and we get to see the inside of that trooper's head because like he's one of the ones telling the story.
Yes,
to Ned.
Yeah, it's like, and it's super insidious too because he's like, I didn't want to do this. I just found myself doing it. Like, and even when we get toward the climax, and Sandy is trying to save Ned from this thing. He is kind of outlining all of these coincidences, all of these small mistakes that he definitely wouldn't have made. And taking precautions, right?
Right.
It's super cool the way they do that. Everything here comes to a head in 1988 at the worst day ever. The primary narrators for this are Shirley and Eddie. So you've got the dispatch, the woman who works dispatch and communications, and Eddie, who is kind of this unreliable guy who is sinking into alcoholism. He's popped up a couple of times in the stories as just kind of not being a real great cop. But he's here, and he was one of the people who saw the major thing. And interestingly, the major thing is not the time when a chemical tanker ran into a school bus. Right. Yeah.
That just happened to happen at the same time.
Right. Good coincidences again, just like the car that hit Curtis being driven by the guy who found the Buick. They later hypothesized that the Buick arranged this, that it extended its influence because what this did was it drew most of the troopers away from the barracks. to
right.
go.
So they had to deal with the result of this like weird alien explosion, understaffed.
Yes. Yeah. Like maybe the Buick thought that if it drew most of the troopers away, that it would, that whatever came out would have a better chance of surviving, of getting out. No idea. It is futile to put human motivations on it. The other thing that goes wrong is that Eddie and his partner pick up Eddie's his old high school bully, Brian Lippy, who has gone full neo-Nazi. He's hopped up on angel dust and he's beating the shit out of his girlfriend in his truck on the road. Brian Lippy is the perfect victim for this.
And this is neo-Nazi in the 80s, before it was cool.
Yeah, but before we had a president.
Right.
Yeah. No, he's like wearing swastika necklaces and stuff. Like, there are lots of unlikable people in Stephen King stuff. This might be, middle, straight up the middle. But I don't like this guy. I'm happy that the Buick eats him.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they arrest Lippy. One of them tries to speak some sense into his girlfriend, but that is to no avail. They bring him back to the station, only to narrowly miss Mr. D. He's charging out in front of the cruiser, rushing toward the shed. They brake very hard, and Brian Lippy breaks his nose. And they rush out to see what's going on. What's going on is that Mr. D is running at a 7-foot-tall humanoid tripod thing that is standing in the shed. It has come through. We have a sentient being now.
Finally.
Yeah. God, I love this thing so much. Not just because of his weird alien geometry and like the trunk that comes out of his chest that happens to have his sensory organs, but for the fact that like he is sending out psychic screams that are that carry pictures of what it perceives the humans to be.
Oh, that's interesting. I interpreted that as like, I don't know, metaphor or poetic license on Stephen King's part. Mm-hmm. I actually do really like the idea that like part of this thing's defense mechanism is to just tell you how bad you are.
Oh yeah. Yeah. But this thing doesn't actually like make noise. Like everybody who rushes to deal with it is kind of assaulted with a scream that seemed to come from inside their head. Like Eddie looks at Shirley and she's trying to cover her ears, and he says, "Don't do that. Your head might explode. You need to let the scream out," which is not how sound works.
Yeah, but it's not sound apparently.
Yeah. And
this is one of those things where like it may well be that this sort of the concept, whatever medium is carrying this transmission, these psychic screams, might not even exist in our universe, but could just be like a little bit of it leaked out of the trunk along with this thing.
Yeah,
but then like, why does the human brain have an interface to it?
Yeah, like why is there just straight up like a psionic attack that happens here?
Right.
Like just if you think about it at the level of like brain waves, like alpha waves and beta waves and all of that, like how is it hitting us with a frequency that we can perceive, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing I like about this, it's not really trying to kill them. It's like panicking. It's spitting out, acid and stuff like that. It has a dog like straight up attacking it and taking chunks out of it, which ends up being Mr. D's undoing. But it is, lashing out at these things that it doesn't understand. And eventually, what is it? Archie, Eddie, and Shirley, they're doing the same thing. Like they cannot suffer it to live. They're experiencing this like deep down revulsion that thing ought not be. So they pick up like a post hole digger and a rake and like a pitchfork and start going to town on it.
Yeah, it's very I don't know, I was going to say it's very much like that one video of someone crashing at the end of a police chase, being thrown from the thrown from the vehicle, and then a bunch of cops just like descending on this body and beating it with clubs.
Oh, Jesus. Yeah, I've not seen that video. I will go out of my way to not see it.
Yeah, that's probably for the best.
Probably.
And maybe I should have used this reference in the first place. That video made me think of the ape scene from 2001.
Oh, yeah. That is actually a pretty good one. Yeah. But this is a bad scene.
Anyway, there's extremely primal, unconscious response.
Yes. They don't even think to take pictures of it. Like with the Polaroid, they just have to beat it until it doesn't move anymore. And at the end is when they get the perspective that, you know, like, oh, we are monsters to them as they are monsters to us. Yeah.
A good lesson for cops and robbers too.
Yeah. Who's the real criminal? I mean, like I
well,
say that
one of them's the real criminal, but which one's the real monster is the question.
Yeah, there we go. Criminal is loaded. Yeah,
criminal we've established. That's
yeah, I suppose. Let's move on to more deeper reads on this.
Right.
So they take photos of this thing, but it's really no use. It's already starting to decompose. They find the radio in the trunk. It's like a walkie-talkie size piece of stone. They surmise that it's a radio because they press like an upraised section and an antenna pops out. What they think is an antenna. Again, there might be some snap degrade going on. But the big deal here is that that Nazi that they picked up, Brian Lippy, he's gone.
Right, and like Ennis, they just kind of Brian disappears without a trace, but everybody kind of just assumes the car ate him.
Yeah, they by this point they've watched this stuff happen enough that they say it's almost like an inhalation and an exhalation. So like if it exhales this gigantic thing, you know, the biggest and most complicated thing that it's put out yet, it's possible that it is going to want something else in return. It is going to want to take a breath in, and it will take one of us. And it just happens that they took Brian Lippy, but they have no way of knowing, really. They surmise that this happened, but like he could still be out there, like ready to tell the story about the alien that he saw these cops beat to death as he, you know, bled out of his nose.
Right.
Yeah. And that's the end of the story, much to Ned's frustration.
The story, not the framing device, but the internal story.
Yes, that is the end of the story that the troopers are telling to Ned. It's basically like, okay, and that's really all that we have to say. There were a couple of other incidents, but nothing as big as the worst day ever. So I don't know. You want to go get something? I want to go something to drink. Like, night's young. Let's go. He's not really having it. They're like, there was one final conversation. Curtis and Sandy almost came to blows over how much they should be watching it.
Ned is just assuming that they must have left something out because it's not a story yet.
No, it's just a bunch of stuff that happened. It was and then and not this happened, and then as a result this happened.
And again, this is actually arguably a problem with the book.
Yes. Like it's weird that it ends up not being like, maybe you could see this and be frustrated. I think that this coda does a little bit to at least show you that things are headed in a direction.
Yeah. I think it's just enough.
Yeah.
Which is right for like a book that is about like unknowable mysteries, that like it's got to give you enough to be tantalizing without really being satisfying.
Yeah, it's like it is closure of a piece that is like, okay, eventually this will stop being a factor, right? Eventually it will, you know, rust and die. You know, we're going to get to how that articulates. But like, we're never going to learn why this happened. All that will be is just that it happens.
Yeah.
So, you know, Ned's not very happy. Sandy goes to get dinner and has like this realization that Ned almost asked a question. Well, did any of you try to destroy it? And kind of didn't get it out. And Sandy kind of has a bit of a premonition saying like, okay, well, he's probably going to try and do something stupid. He's right. Ned is sitting in the driver's seat of the car with a gas can and a gun. The entire thing is soaked with gas. He wants to, set it on fire, which I don't know if that would do anything. And
yeah, who knows?
Yeah. And Ned is very much like, at one point he says, "This killed my daddy." Like, they've all come to the conclusion that the Buick reached out and caused the accident that killed Curtis, as revenge for, basically the information campaign that Curtis waged against it.
I think this sort of this model of mind control is it's really resonant with me, because I actually feel like this is how our brains actually work. Like, the you that is conscious is, like, my model of it, at least, is that, like, the decision making happens at a much lower level, and the you that is conscious and observing it has like only the tiniest bit of actual control over what's going on.
Yeah.
But it is so important for whatever reason, it's so important to our psychology to believe that we're in control. Like, we come up with reasons why we did something.
Yeah, it is like backward justified. Like, we already made the decision, and what we consider to be agency is kind of a story that we tell ourselves.
Do you remember when the Twitch plays Dark Souls, at the very beginning, before they invented the way to make it turn-based,
mm-hmm.
where, like, they managed to get to, like, the pool next to the asylum demon, and then could never leave the pool
because they couldn't find the stairway out.
Yeah, watching that video, I feel like that's what dementia is like.
Oh yeah,
like just having, like, everybody watching has some idea, like, no, we want to walk up the stairs and get out of the pool. That's what we all want to do, but nobody, we're all fighting against each other to do it, and the result is you just kind of fucking wander around in the same pool for the rest of your life.
Right.
And some part of you is observing this happening and going crazy.
Right. The part of you that creates the intention and observes things that you create the intention in response to, like, watches that intention be diffused over the course of any number of inputs and just kind of broken wiring.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so Ned, like, some force made him walk back to the car, and his consciousness came up with the justification that he's getting revenge for the thing killing his dad.
Right. And, depending on how much you think the car or the force that is guiding the car understands about human psychology, you could also say it's exploiting a vulnerability throughout this entire time. Like, this is, some of this is the story of the car, but really it's, he's hearing about his dad. Like, that's the thing that he is really curious about. Most of his questions are, and then, what did he think? What did he do? Like, this is a part of his family's life and a part of his past that he never really had any insight into. So, understanding that is a huge vulnerability that could be leveraged to manipulate Ned into doing what he wants it to do. That is either something that was done intentionally, or that was the weakest point that would have given to the force anyway. That would have given to the force that the Buick exerted.
If you believe in the anthropic principle, this story is played out millions of times over millions of universes, but this was the only one where the outcome was interesting enough to write a book about.
Like, there were just a bunch of points where, like, he tripped and landed and spilled the gas all over himself, and then the gun went off and ignited it.
Right.
Like, oh yeah, he was like 50 feet away from the car, or from the shed.
Or just the mind control didn't work at all, and he just went home and was annoyed.
But it's like, okay, what was the purpose that that was trying to be achieved, right? Because the car, so either the car wanted Ned to succeed in trying to destroy it because of the knock-on effect that we'll talk about just a little bit later. It wanted Ned dead, or it wanted to breathe in something else, because, like, being put into this car, as it is getting ready to breathe in, like the portal gonna open, and that's ultimately what we end up seeing. Like, what is the man? I see, here I am asking questions and, like, getting hypotheses that I'll never have an answer to. Like what does it stand to gain from making him do this?
Yeah, and we just can't know. That's
Yeah.
part of the fun.
Yeah. I'm falling for this book's tricks. Yeah. But the portal opens up, and Ned falls through. Sandy catches him. And Sandy's kind of the only person who's looking down as Ned is looking up. As they're being sucked through into the world. We're going to get his account of what's on the other side there later. And the other troopers, come back because they get a sense that something's wrong as well. And they form a literal chain that saves them. And this lines up poetically with something that Sandy talks about, that there is a chain between events that we don't realize, that is connecting us to other things and keeping us from falling into the abyss. So it is very literal, that interpretation. Ned is saved because of the chain that leads from his father down to him through Troop D. But
and it's made literal by humans. And I think that anytime you think about the idea of there being karmic justice in the universe, or the idea that God has a plan,
mm-hmm.
or just that the universe cares about us, the only way that these things can be become real and affect our lives in any way is if humans actually make it happen.
Yes.
And so that's what is, I think, being depicted there to some extent. I don't know if that was the author's intent, but that's how I read it.
Yeah. It's a little bit like I don't know. We did Night in the Woods recently, and one of the most salient quotes from that is, "I believe in a universe that doesn't care, but people who do."
Yep.
Yeah. Or okay, you go to church and say, okay, well, I've never seen a miracle in my life. And then somebody says, well, medicine's pretty cool, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Stuff like that. But it's made manifest by people enacting it. And so Ned's safe. And we hear about one final conversation. Ned had constantly been asking, what was my dad's hypothesis? And ultimately what Curtis arrived at after he made his peace with this thing sitting out back was that the car is sentient and somehow arranging people's behavior, but its greater purpose is almost as a valve, almost like a pressure release valve, equalizing some kind of force between different worlds. And if it went away, if they tried to destroy it, that pressure would be catastrophic, either to the fabric of reality or just to this part of rural Pennsylvania.
Yeah, and this is a very effective sort of hypothesis because it's very vivid.
Yes.
And because of its vividness, it feels real to whoever he was talking to about it, and also to the reader. But it's also just another hypothesis.
Yes.
But just because this is a horror novel, it's got to be what would actually happen.
Right.
That's my sense of it. Oh yeah, that's, if I don't know if Stephen King knows the facts, but I bet that's his headcanon.
I mean, that's why he has it said last, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so if the Buick is actually malicious, if it knows that it is going to die, as we have seen, and as Curtis even says, eventually it'll probably just fall apart, sooner or later, more or less, it will die in its sleep. If the Buick knows it's going to go out, maybe it wants to get revenge again on Curtis by killing his son, but also have it happen through the course of destroying the car and, taking this dimension or this part of this dimension with it. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. But after this, Sandy, before we get to the epilogue, recounts what he saw when he was saving Ned. Looking down, he saw this alien shore under an alien sky. He saw boots, so parts of Ennis Rafferty's uniform that were left there. He saw the swastika necklace, and also a little bit menacingly, the part of the uniform, the Stetson that Ennis was wearing. It was on the ground, and it had a stake driven through it.
Yeah, and these two ideas, the reveal of what Sandy saw and Curtis's idea of the hypothesis of what the car might be or some property of it, those are enough that I felt like a little bit clicked in my head in terms of now it's a story.
Yes.
Now this is like, now you can end this book and it won't feel like I was just given a mishmash of stuff that happened. And I wonder, like, if those two things had happened before they were talking to Ned, would Ned have been satisfied at least a little?
Oh, like if they said, like, okay, we at least figured out where these people who disappeared went.
Yeah. And the idea that, and if like Ned bought the idea that it was a valve.
Yeah. Yeah. If Ned was projecting out and realized, okay, this car wasn't sent from this other place, like the Buick was, actually enacting chaos on both of these worlds, right? Like the stake through the hat implies that, whatever was on the other side also feared the things that were coming through.
Yeah, like and I believe in the book they hypothesized that it was a situation very much like when the creature with the radio came through and was immediately murdered by 4 police officers.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, they talk about it like Ennis Rafferty, his boot, like he saw bones sticking out of it. It was either killed by something sentient or it was eaten by something that was passing by, and probably suffered the same fate that Mr. D did. We didn't talk about Mr. D. Oh my gosh.
We talked a little bit about Mr. D.
A little bit, yeah. He ate like in the process of killing the humanoid thing. He ate some of the flesh and started burning from the inside. His eyes dissolved into jelly, and one of the troopers had to euthanize it by shooting him.
Yeah. There was a on Goodreads there was a review of this book, which was basically that it's just like, oh yeah, Stephen King took the Tommyknockers and Christine and kind of jammed them together. But that in detail is definitely from Eyes of the Dragon.
Yes. Oh yeah, the eating something that burns you from the inside.
Right.
Yeah. So this takes us to the epilogue. Stephen King does a real old switcheroo, because a prominent detail about Ned is that when his dad died, he got this old car. Just a car that was kind of the same vintage as the Buick. And we hear about an obituary, and we hear about a funeral happening, because of this car crashing. We're led to believe that Ned crashed his car, under the influence of the Buick. Who knows? No, it turns out it was Eddie committing suicide because he had fully succumbed to his alcoholism again.
And Ned sold his car to Eddie.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the weird little, like, card trick that I'm not sure what the point of it was.
No, like maybe it's so the last death in the story is, kind of goes back to the business as usual thing. Like no matter how unknowable and how alien this car is, the true danger here was still the job. Was still just the prosaic everyday, danger of living. Right.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not that crazy about the switcheroo. Like,
yeah,
it takes, it's like, it's set up like a mystery. Like it's a misdirection. It's a misdirection that only lasts like 2-3 pages, something like that.
Right.
I don't know if it was worth what Stephen King bought with it. Yeah, but it turns out, this is 4 years later. Ned is washed out of college, and he decided that his true place was with Troop D. He's become a trooper just like his dad was. And so after the funeral, while the reception's going on, Ned and Sandy are back at the barracks, and Ned calls Sandy's attention to the Buick. There's a crack in the windshield that's been there for at least 2 days, and it's not healed.
Yeah, it's whatever mechanism or force that's keeping this thing a car apparently is losing its power.
Yes. Yeah. No matter how many of our laws and norms this thing violates, it is still subject to entropy.
Yeah, apparently.
Yeah. And that's from a Buick 8. I love this book, Jim.
It's real good.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's real good, and it makes me want to, like, if I'm going to, like, reinvent myself as a reader, which, by the way, I really want to do before my kid gets old enough to observe and, like, see me as a role model. I need to, maybe I should be seeking out more, like, modern Lovecraft-ish stories.
Yeah. Yeah. Gary is good for those things. He has good recommendations based on that. So I would direct you his way.
Sounds good.
Yeah. But yeah, definitely you don't want to be like, okay, he's paying attention, now I start reading. It needs to be something that would have been done before he even noticed, right?
Yeah, ideally, yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Well, do you have any final thoughts on the book?
And not off the top of my head. We've covered it pretty well, I think.
Cool. Yeah, I feel like I've said everything I need to say. This is a huge recommendation. If you have listened to this, there's a lot of detail that just happens here. The everyday life of the barracks is still really cool to read about. Jim, where can people find you on the internet?
So I am Mogwai Poet on Twitter, MOGWAI_POET. And you can find my games on twinbeard.com. And I record a podcast with the Kingdom of Loathing folks at videogameshotdog.com. And that's about this. Oh, also, if you're on Mastodon, like I removed Twitter from my phone because it was making me miserable. But so if you want to like actually communicate with me in a way where I'm going to notice and respond, you're better off reaching out to me at Mastodon. I'm at Mogwai Poet at mastodon.social.
Okay.
So there it is.
Cool. Yeah. Thank you very much for coming on. This has been a good time.
Yeah.
Everybody who's listening has, you know the stuff that you can do. Patreon.com/Duckfeed.tv. Check out the other shows on the network. If you like horror related things, which you probably do, check out hexcrank.com, where I do live streams and also retrospective articles and videos about horror games going back, as far as I can go.
They're really good.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And that's just about everything. So, we're going to take our leave here. We're going to be back next time with the beginning of Song of Susanna. And until then, long days and pleasant nights.
And to you as well.